Right now, your government is spending more on debt interest than it does on veterans, infrastructure, and education combined. Last year alone, that number crossed $892 billion. And it's accelerating. But here's what keeps me up at night. This isn't some budget miscalculation or political failure. It's the inevitable conclusion of a system designed over 3 centuries ago. A system that has collapsed catastrophically 3 times before, and we're watching the 4th collapse unfold in real time. What if I told you there's a mathematical pattern, a 4-stage sequence, that has predicted the destruction of entire monetary systems spanning back to the 1600s? Not a theory, not a prediction. A documented historical cycle with such precision that once you understand it, you'll see exactly where we are right now. And more importantly, what comes next. By the end of this, you'll understand why 2008 wasn't the main event. It was merely the opening act. But before we can see where we're heading, we need to understand how this machine was built in the first place, because the system's design guarantees its failure. London, 1694. England is drowning in debt. 9 years of warfare against France have emptied the royal coffers. King William III faces a catastrophic choice: default or find a radical solution. Enter William Paterson, a Scottish merchant, with an audacious proposal. Grant me the authority to issue money as debt, and I'll provide the crown with £1.2 million immediately. On July 27, 1694, the Bank of England opened its doors. But here's the critical detail they gloss over. That initial £1.2 million wasn't extracted from gold reserves. It was conjured into existence through accounting entries. Every pound created carried an interest charge that would need to be repaid. But here's the mathematical trap. The principal was created, but the interest to repay it never was. Stage 1 complete. The architecture of a debt-based monetary system is now in place. For the following decades, the mechanism performs flawlessly. Wars are financed. Colonial expansion accelerates. Trade flourishes. But underneath, a mathematical impossibility grows. The debt expands faster than the economy because while the borrowed principal enters circulation, the interest owed was never created. New debt must be continuously generated just to service existing obligations. It's not a flaw in the system, it is the system. Stage 2 begins: expansion and debasement. The currency begins losing its purchasing power, gradually at first, then with shocking velocity. By 1720, speculative mania has gripped London. The South Sea Company promises impossible returns. Investors from every social class pour their savings into shares. The bubble swells beyond all rational valuation. Then it detonates. Fortunes evaporate overnight. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is imprisoned in the Tower of London. Stage 3 arrives: loss of control. Public confidence in the monetary system disintegrates. Parliament erupts into chaos. The entire financial structure teeters on collapse. Credit freezes. Commerce grinds to a halt. Now you might be thinking this is ancient history, irrelevant to our modern financial system. Keep that thought, because what happened in Germany less than a century ago will demonstrate this pattern with horrifying clarity. June 28, 1919. The Treaty of Versailles is signed. Germany, defeated and broken, is handed a bill for 132 billion gold marks in reparations. In today's currency, roughly $600 billion, an impossible sum for a shattered economy. But Germany attempts to meet these obligations. The printing presses start running. What happens next defies comprehension. In December 1922, a loaf of bread in Berlin costs 160 marks. 10 months later, in November 1923, that identical loaf costs 200 billion marks. 200 billion marks for bread. The exchange rate reaches 4.2 trillion marks to $1. Monthly inflation hits 29,500%. Factory workers demand payment twice daily because wages become worthless within hours. People carry currency in wheelbarrows because that's the physical volume required for basic necessities. Life savings, pensions, government bonds, all reduced to worthless paper in months. Stage 4, the reset. The monetary system doesn't just fail, it implodes completely. The social contract shatters, and from that chaos, extremism finds fertile ground. We all know the catastrophic sequence that followed. Germany's hyperinflation didn't just destroy an economy. It destroyed a society and opened the door for one of history's darkest chapters. Now pay close attention, because this exact pattern is unfolding in the world's largest economy. August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon interrupts television programming with an emergency announcement. He's terminating the dollar's convertibility to gold, ending the Bretton Woods system. Why? Because America had printed so many dollars to finance the Vietnam War and military expansion that foreign governments, particularly France, began demanding their gold back. The United States was running dangerously low, so Nixon made a unilateral decision that changed everything. The dollar became pure fiat currency, backed by nothing tangible, only government promise and military power. Stage 2 ignites immediately. The 1970s become an economic nightmare. In 1964, inflation stood at 1%, unemployment at 5%. 10 years later, inflation erupted to 12%, unemployment climbed to 7%. By summer 1980, inflation peaked at 14.5%. Unemployment eventually hit 10.8%. The dollar lost one-third of its purchasing power in less than a decade. Savings were decimated. Stage 3 arrives with brutal force. The economy becomes paralyzed by stagflation, stagnant growth combined with rampant inflation. Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker raises interest rates to nearly 20%, deliberately inducing recession to crush inflation. Businesses fail by the thousands, unemployment soars, the housing market collapses. The system comes within a razor's edge of breakdown. But here's the crucial difference. This time it doesn't fully reset. Instead, it stabilizes temporarily through painful monetary policy, and because the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. The debt doesn't disappear. It metastasizes, growing exponentially larger with each passing year. Which brings us to today. Let me show you exactly where we are in this cycle. Stage 1, the foundation. Established with the Federal Reserve's creation in 1913, but fully activated in 1971, when Nixon severed the gold standard. The US dollar became the global reserve currency, backed not by precious metals, but by debt obligations and military supremacy. Complete. Stage 2, expansion and debasement. Since 1971, U.S. national debt has exploded from $370 billion to over $35 trillion today. That's a 94-fold increase. Global debt now stands at $318 trillion, more than triple world economic output. Central banks have created trillions responding to successive crises. The dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power since 1913. Verified and undeniable. Stage 3, loss of control. We are here right now. Inflation surged past 9% in 2022, the highest in 4 decades. Annual interest payments on U.S. debt now exceed $892 billion. That's more than the entire defense budget. The Federal Reserve is trapped in an impossible dilemma. Raise rates and the economy contracts, potentially triggering recession. Lower rates and inflation accelerates, destroying purchasing power. There is no good option, only choices between different categories of pain. Social unrest is intensifying. Political polarization has reached levels not seen since the Civil War era. Public trust in institutions is collapsing across all demographics. These aren't subjective observations. They're measured, documented trends. So what happens next? Stage 4, the reset. Here's what you must understand. I'm not claiming the dollar collapses next Tuesday or that the financial system implodes next month. But the mathematics are inescapable. When debt grows exponentially faster than the economy, when interest payments consume ever larger shares of revenue, when the only solution to debt crisis is more debt, the system will break. It's not if, it's when and how. History doesn't repeat with perfect precision, but it rhymes with patterns so consistent they border on mathematical law. Will the reset manifest as hyperinflation like Weimar Germany? A sovereign debt default cascading through the global system? Implementation of a new central bank digital currency giving governments unprecedented control? Some combination of all three? I cannot predict the exact form, but I know the pattern with absolute certainty. And the pattern is mathematically inevitable. Here's what nobody in power wants to acknowledge. The people claiming this time is different are either dangerously ignorant of history or deliberately lying. American exceptionalism will not save us from mathematical reality. Technology will not solve a structural debt problem. Modern monetary theories promise that governments can print unlimited money, ignores every historical precedent. The machine doesn't care about optimism or political ideology. It cares only about mathematics, and the mathematics simply do not work. $318 trillion in global debt, $35 trillion in U.S. federal debt alone, $892 billion in annual interest payments growing every quarter, accelerating inflation eroding purchasing power, central banks trapped between impossible choices, rising social unrest and political extremism. These aren't opinions or predictions. These are present-day facts, and they're all pointing in one direction. So here's what you do with this information. First, understand the machine. See the pattern clearly. Recognize that what's happening now isn't random chaos. It's a systematic progression built into the system's architecture. Second, position yourself strategically, not panic. Preparation. Focus on assets with intrinsic value, scarce resources, productive skills, tangible goods with real utility. These will outlast paper promises. Third, stop waiting for someone to fix this from above. No politician has the incentive. No central banker can escape the trap. No policy will prevent stage 4. The only question is whether you'll see it coming. 2008 was the warning shot that showed the system's fragility. The real crisis, the truly systemic collapse, hasn't happened yet. But if you understand this pattern, if you see the stages clicking into place, you won't be caught by surprise. The machine is following its programming exactly as designed. The mathematics are playing out precisely as they have 3 times before. The only variable is whether you'll recognize the pattern before stage 4 completes its cycle. The next phase isn't coming. It's already here, building pressure beneath the surface like a geological fault line approaching critical stress. The only question that matters now is this: will you be ready when it breaks?